This conference will now be recorded.
So in yesterday's initial demo session, we have discussed about performance testing, the architecture at a high level, and a small example of how to record a script. And also we have gone through the course content, and few of the folks have asked some questions. In today's session, we will be discussing about the different types of performance testing. Okay, so performance testing definitely has to be performed, in various approaches. So what are those? What are the different types of testing we need to do? Okay, what are the frequently executed performance tests? What are the types of tests which are executed based on client requirement? So all these things we'll see. So first thing is, yesterday we have discussed about the definition. So it's all about checking the performance or behavior of an application by applying some load, right? So what do you mean by load here? So checking the performance or behavior of an application by applying some load is called performance testing. But however, what do you mean by load?
Users.
Anyone?
So load basically will be applying the users for the particular
Load will
what are
be
the schedule.
Number of transactions or whatever.
number of users, you can say, for time being,
Yeah.
or transactions or whatever it is, because end of the day, if it is number of users also, they also run some transactions, and that is also load only. So either way it is load only. So it's better to say load means basically number of users. Okay, when they run for some amount of time, they will apply some load, isn't it? Now here, if now when I say load, if I'm saying number of users, who is going to give me these number of users? Like who will tell me, like, hey, you need to test the application with so many number of users, right? So who is going to provide that number to us? Like, hey, will you be able to test my application for performance with the load of these like 2000 users or 1000 users or something like that? So basically we will get requirement like this. For example, if it's a banking application, let's say that the business functionality is transfer money. So we might get some requirement like, hey, transfer money we should run with 500 users. Okay, transfer money we should run with 500 users, and they should achieve something like 2000 iterations. What do you mean by iterations here? So for example, transfer money is a business scenario. What are the steps that it includes? For example, the first step will be launch, obviously. Second step will be log into the application. Third step will be navigate to your savings account or whatever it is, right? Then fourth step will be select a beneficiary. Okay, fifth step will be enter amount, and then sixth step will be transfer money. You can click some button like transfer money and all. Then you can log out. So these are transactions. So launch is one transaction, login is one transaction, this navigate to your account is one transaction, select a beneficiary is one transaction, enter amount and transfer money, log out. These are all transactions or steps, you can say. Okay, we call it as transactions. When you execute all these transactions once, that is called one iteration. That is called one iteration. When you execute all these steps or transactions for 2000 times, that is called 2000 iterations. That means my requirement is 500 users should achieve 2000 iterations as per the load test. Okay, so we will discuss that, but for time being, what you understand is when you execute all these steps once, or when you execute all these transactions once, that will become one iteration. That will become one iteration. Okay, now hope you understood. Like what is transaction, what is a scenario, what is iteration. So transaction name, scenario name is this one, transfer money. Load is this one. What do you mean by iterations? Iterations means when you execute all these transactions once, that will become one iteration. So each of these step is one transaction over here. Okay, so here now, what are the different types of load tests? Types of performance tests. So here, the first type of test that we do, okay, is load test. Okay, the first type of test that we do is load test. After that, okay, after that we have something like stress test. We also have something called endurance test. We also have something called scalability test. Okay, we also have a volume test. Okay, we have something called failover test. Okay, these are the important types of performance tests. Okay, so this failover test we will discuss in a day or two, because it has some dependency with the terms, servers, and all those things. So for today, we will understand what are these types of tests. Okay, so first one is load test. So I do have some slides, some PowerPoint slides which explains these different types of tests, which I will share it with you. Okay, but I prefer to use Notepad for today, because I just want to make you understand these types of tests clearly. In detail, I want to write down the definition and all. But going forward, I will give you those slides also. Okay, so that you can keep it as a reference. So what do you mean by load test? This is the first type of test that we do. This is the basic test. Basic test in sense, uh, the first type of test that we execute, okay, in any performance testing project. So without this load test, generally we won't do other types of tests. Okay, if the load test is not successful, we won't go for other types of tests. Okay, so load test means checking the speed, checking the speed of the application. Okay, checking the speed of the application under some expected load. Okay, so what do you mean by checking the speed? What do you mean by checking the speed? And of course, here the client will give you the expected load. The client will provide you expected load. What do you mean by expected load? Expected load means expected number of users. Users and volumes. Okay, the client will provide you, okay, users or volumes. For example, 500 users. Okay, and so on. Now, checking the speed of the application. What do you mean by checking the speed? That means we are checking the response times. Yesterday, when we recorded a small script, and after I executed, I've shown you some response times, right? So for login, it has taken some 0.5 seconds. For launch, it has taken 0.5. For login, it has taken 0.2. For log off, it has taken some 0.2 seconds, and so on. So those are response times. Okay, so what do you mean by checking the speed? We are going to check the response times of the transactions. How much time the login has taken, how much time the log off has taken, how much time the selected beneficiary has taken, whatever may be the transaction. Okay, then obviously for these response times, 2 seconds is the industry standard SLA. SLA means service level agreement. Okay, this is an agreement between the client and the application team. Okay, they say that, hey, all the transactions must be must get response times less than 2 seconds. That means when you click a link or when you click a button on the page, it should navigate to other page within 2 seconds. That is the SLA, that is the agreement. Okay, that is the agreement. Now what do we exactly do here? We verify the response times. We verify the response times. The response time should not exceed 2 seconds, okay, or 3 seconds depending on the project. Now, the one more important point with respect to load test is load test will be executed for 1 hour. For 1 hour. Okay, so load test will be executed for 1 hour. So you can start a test at 9 a.m. You can end a test at 10 a.m. and something like that. So every load test anywhere in any project will be executed only for 1 hour. Okay, executed only for 1 hour. Okay, so what are we exactly doing here? We are verifying the response times. So load test is all about checking the speed of the application under some expected load. Expected load means some number of users the client will provide, right? When those number of users are accessing the application, and then at that point of time we are going to verify the response times and all those things. Load test will be executed for 1 hour. Okay, so this is about load test at a high level. Okay, so hope you guys understood about load test. So load test is run for 1 hour to check the speed of the application, how the application is responding, how fast the pages are loading. Okay, so that's about load test. It will be run for 1 hour. 2 seconds will be default SLA. It can be 3 or 5 seconds depending on your project. Okay, who will give you the expected load? Client will give you the expected load, that is the number of users or the target volumes, whatever it is. Okay, now the next type of test is stress testing. Okay, basically the next type of testing is stress testing. So here stress testing means testing the application with more number of users, okay, than the load test. Okay, so testing the application with more number of users than the load test, or you can say that testing the application by applying more amount of load than the actual load test. So here whatever the amount of load we applied, more than that, if you apply the load, okay, then obviously it will become a stress testing. Okay, so we have to verify the behavior of the application. Okay, so we have to verify the behavior of the application when more number of users access the application than the load test. Okay, we have to verify the behavior of the application, okay, when more number of users access the application than the load test. So if load test is, let's say if load test is run with 500 users, if load test is run with 500 users, so stress testing will be executed with more number of users than 500. That means it can go to 600, 700 also, 800, depends. So that means you are applying more stress to the application, and then you are seeing how it is behaving, how it is responding, how it is responding. Here also we will check the SLA. Okay, that means we are going to check the response times, verify the response times. So when we are going to check the response times, let's say you are running the load, let's say you run the load test with 500 users. So initially I want to run this stress test with 600, and I want to see how the application is responding. If it is working absolutely fine, I can go to 700 users or 800 users also. I can go and test like how it is working. Okay, how it is working. Okay, so whether the application is able to handle more number of users. So that is the main thing here. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to verify whether the application is able to handle more number of users. Okay, so when that means you have to stress
Hello.
the application. Yeah, tell me. Tell me. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, do tell me.
Hello.
Okay. So stress testing, how is it different from load testing? So generally, whatever the load or whatever the volumes, whatever the load that we apply for load test, we need to test beyond that number, beyond that load. So if you're testing load test with 500 users, then you need to test, you need to go for stress testing with more than 500 users. You can test with 600, you can test with 700, you can test with 800, you can test with 900 also, and see how it is responding, whether the application is able to handle, whether the application is able to handle more number of users or not. Okay, so that's about stress testing. Okay, and then, and especially what we concentrate here is, so let's say you run a load test with 500 users. Now let's say you're running a load test with 600 users. Now what are the response times, how it is responding? Then if you will check it, and then then you will add few more users, then you will run with 700 users, then you will see how it is responding. So you can check, like, when the stress is being applied consistently, how the application is responding. Okay, so that is about stress testing. Okay, now the next type of test is endurance testing. Okay, we call it as endurance test in some projects. Okay, in some projects they also call it as soak test. Okay, in some projects they also call it as duration test. So why we need to run this test? So endurance test or soak test or duration test, the names are same, the meaning of the tests are same. It is all about, checking the stability of the application. It is all about checking the stability of the application. What do you mean by stability? So let's say, uh, let's say this particular endurance test. Okay, basically it will run for 3 hours or 5 hours or 8 hours. Okay, so this test will run for 3 hours. Okay, or 5 hours or 8 hours or 1 day or 2 days, or you can say 2 days, 3 days, or in fact 5 days also. This type of test will be run for minimum of 3 hours or 5 hours or 8 hours or 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or 5 days, depending on the project requirement, project criticality. Okay, all those things. Now it is all about checking the stability of the application. When I say checking the stability of the application, it means the application should respond similarly throughout the test. Okay, the application should respond similarly throughout the test. Okay, similarly throughout the test. Okay, that means, let's say the performance should not degrade. Okay, the performance should not degrade. What do you mean by performance should not degrade? So you are running a load test for 3 hours. Let's say load test for 3 hours. So in the first 1 hour, first 1 hour, okay, first 1 hour, you got response time somewhere between 1.5 seconds. Average response times you got 1.5 seconds to somewhere between 2 seconds. Then in the next 1 hour, that is second hour. Okay, in the second hour, you are getting response times, let's say between 2 seconds to let's say 3 seconds. And in the third hour, okay, in the third hour of the testing, let's say you are getting response time somewhere between 5 seconds. So this is called performance degradation. Performance degradation. That means in the first 1 hour, it is responding very well. Second response, the performance degraded little bit, and then the third hour, the performance degraded even more. So to find out if any these sort of issues are there, we will run this endurance test. Okay, the performance should be stable. That means how the response times are coming up in the first 1 hour. Okay, if the response times are like 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds in the first 1 hour, the similar kind of response times you should get throughout the test. That means all the 3 hours, your response time should be stable, should be constant. Like first 1 hour, if it is absolutely fine, second 1 hour, it's not at all fine, third hour, it's completely degraded. No, that means your application is not stable. That means your application is not stable. So if you want to check the application for stability, then you need to run an endurance test or soak test or duration test with a minimum of 3 hours or 5 hours or 8 hours or 1 day or 2 days. Most of the projects, or majority of the projects, they run endurance test for 8 hours or 8 hours, 5 to 8 hours minimum. Okay, very rare it's 3 hours, but majority of the projects they run for 5 hours or 8 hours or something like that. Okay, so rarely the performance test will run for 1 day, 2 days or 3 days or 5 days also. This type of test, endurance or soak or duration test. So this is all about checking the stability of the application. So what exactly you do? You create scripts for some business scenarios like transfer money, paying credit card bill or something like that. Then you upload all those scripts into controller, and when you run the scripts for 3 hours or 5 hours, okay, then you need to monitor the response times, like how those are response times are coming. Okay, and one more important thing why we exactly do this test is, of course, the performance should not degrade. Then at the same time, we will check for memory leaks. We will check for memory leak issue. If there is any memory leak issue, we will check. So what do you mean by memory leak? We will discuss in detail later, because we need to discuss some topics related to that. Okay, so there will be some kind of issue called memory leak. Okay, wherein you might get some type of errors called out of memory exception. So here, when there is a memory leak, okay, when you run this endurance test, apart from the performance degradation, if there is some memory leak, okay, then you will see OOM issue, that is out of memory issue, out of memory error exception. Out of memory exception you will see, okay, during the test. You'll see out of memory exception during the test. Okay, so for this purpose we actually run this test. Okay, in some projects. Okay, so then you might ask, sir, what will be the load, what will be the volume for this test? What will be the volume for this test? So in some projects, the load that we apply here is something similar to load test only. That means in some projects, so the load applied here will be same as load test. That means if load test is run with 500 users, so the endurance test will also run with 500 users. In 500 users. In some projects, load will be 75%. Load will be 75% of the load test. The load applied will be 75% of the load test. That means if load test is run with 500 users, then endurance test will be run okay, will be run with what is 75% of 500? 375 users, right? So it depends on projects. Some projects they run with the same load, okay, like 100% load only. Some projects they will run with 75% of the load. Okay, so it's very important test. Okay, so overall it's all about checking the stability of the application. Generally we will run this test for 3 hours or 5 hours or 8 hours, 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or 5 days. The application should respond similarly throughout the test. That is the primary thing. And the performance should not degrade. That means the response time should not degrade. Okay, like this. Okay, apart from that, we also verify if there is any memory leak issue. Is there any out of memory exception? Okay, then what is the load that is applied here? Generally, it is same as load test. Okay, but in some projects they apply, they will go with 75% of the load test. Okay, that if the load test is run with 500 users, then endurance test will run with 375 users. Okay, so where you might get a little bit confused, like where exactly we are going to give this number of users. You are going to configure or enter these number of users in controller. That means when you are ready with your scripts for all the business scenarios, when you upload them into controller, there you are going to provide with how many number of users you are going to run and for how many number of hours. Okay, if you want to run for 1 hour, you can run for 1 hour. If you want to run for 1 day, you can run for 1 day. If you want to run for 3 hours, you can run for 3 hours. It depends on the type of test that we do. Okay, then we have scalability test. Then you have something called scalability test. Okay, so basically this type of test we do, okay, to especially after considering the future growth of the application. For example, if the client is saying that in next 6 months user might increase by 50%. Okay, so if the next 6 months the user might increase by 50%. So if current number of users what we are testing as part of load test, if it is 500, then you can run a scalability test with more 50% more, that is 750 users. Okay, so I will write those points here. You can test the application. You can test the application considering future growth. Okay, future growth is also one point. Then what do you mean by that? If client is saying, okay, if client is saying that in next 6 months, okay, users might increase by 50%. What do you mean by that? That means if currently you are testing with currently you are testing with 500 users. So let's say if currently you are testing with 500 users, okay, then you need to run with 50% more, that is 750 users for the scalability test. So if load test is, okay, if currently if you are load testing with 500 users, then you need to run scalability test with 750 users. Why? Because client said in next 6 months the users might increase by 50%, right? And you can increase the load, like you can also double the load also. For example, you can run the 200% load also. That means, what do you mean by 200% load? So if actual load test is 500 users, 200% load means 1000 users. That means these 500 users will become 100% load. These 500 users what we ran for load test will become 100% load. So when you say 200% load, that means 1000 users. 1000 users. You got it? So that's the reason 200% load means 1000 users. So that's the reason in some projects they might use these terms like 100% load test, okay, 200% load test, like this, 300% load test. So I'll tell you one example. Recently, I think 1.5 year, I think 2 years ago, there was a specific client requirement. Okay, the requirement, especially during the pandemic, we all know, right? There was a pandemic situation. Uh, so I was working for one of the US bank client. So one day, client they called us and they said like, hey, during this pandemic, we have observed a huge increase in the number of users accessing the online application. So before pandemic, people used to go to nearby banks and like clarify their doubts or whatever the work they have, they used to do. Now because of pandemic, they started using these online applications, and currently and suddenly the client observed there is a huge increase in the number of users accessing the bank applications. So they called us and said that, hey, we observed a huge increase, and we also assumed that the number of users accessing our bank application might increase by 4 times. That's what they said. Might increase by 4 times, and they immediately asked us to test the application, okay, and let them know whether the application is currently able to handle a 400% load, that is 4 times of load. Okay, they asked us to check whether whether the application will be able to handle the 400% load or not. So so what we have to do in that case? What we have to do in that case? So what did we do? So we initially ran quickly. We initially ran a 100% load test. That is, let's say if it is 500 users, then 200%. If it is successful, if everything is fine here, then we immediately ran 200% load test. That is 1,000 users. 1,000 users. Then if everything is working fine here, that means there are no high response times. The application is working fine. Okay, then we immediately run with 300% load. That is 1,500 users. Then if everything is working fine here also, then we run with 2,000 users. Then after this, if everything is working fine or if something is not working, we immediately informed client that, hey, this application is able to handle 2,000 users. That is 4 times of load. So some of the applications what we tested couldn't handle 300% load. Some of the applications couldn't handle 400% load. Some applications were able to handle 400% load. So how can I say the application is able to handle or not? If you run, let's say if you run a 300% load test with 1,500 users, if the application is not responding or if the application is not performing well, if the application is crashing, if the application is loading forever, if you click a button, the pages are loading forever, then that means there is some issue. Or if you are getting very high response times, that means there is some issue. That means the application is not able to handle. So these are the points which you need to take it into account when there is some specific requirement from the client like this. Definitely, in all the performance testing projects, there might be some ad hoc requirement like this at some point of time. Okay, so we should be ready. We should be able to tell how we can achieve the requirement given by client. So did we expect that the client will immediately come to us and ask like, hey, can you test the application 4 times the load of current what you are currently testing for the 100% load test? Then did we then when the client said, can you check the application for the 400% load? That means, is the application able to handle 4 times more load than the actual load test? Then did we actually run with 2,000 users here, for example? No, we went step by step. First, we ran with 100% load, then we ran 200% load, then we ran 300% load, and then we ran 400% load. If you run this way, you will clearly tell client until what point or until what is the maximum point or what is the maximum number of users that the application will support. Beyond that, the application will not support. If you would have directly ran the 200% load test, then you will never be able to tell what is the max it can support. Will it be supporting 1,000 or 1,500? No. Yes or no? We cannot say. So that's the reason we have to go step by step, 100, 200, 300, 400, like that. Okay, and sometimes you even might have to go and test until the application breaks also. Sometimes you even might have to go and test until the application breaks. So they will tell us, so the client will immediately call you and tell us, hey, can you test the application until it breaks? What do you mean by that? So you need to keep on adding the load or increase the load. Like let's say load test you run with 500 users. You need to increase the load like 800, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, and tell the client where exactly it has broken. When you say it has broken, you see some huge response times, high response times, and the application crashed, application not responding, application freezing. So at that point of time, or you might get some memory issues or whatever it is, then at that point of time you will be able to tell, okay, the breaking point, or where what is the max number of users it can support. and all those things. Okay, so these are very, very important types of tests. Okay, frequently every release we do these types of tests. So the next type of testing, the last type of testing what we will discuss today is volume testing. Okay, then there are one or two other types of testing which we will discuss later in our upcoming sessions, because there is some dependency. Okay, so the next type of testing is volume testing. What do you mean by volume testing? See, this volume testing is more similar to load test. It is same as load test only. Okay, so volume test is same as load test only. Volume test is same as load test, except that there will be huge data populated, okay, in the database. There will be huge data populated in the database. For example, okay, so the load will be same as load test only. For example, if you are executing a load test with 500 users, the volume test is also done with 500 users. That's the reason we are saying volume test is same as load test only. We will run for 1 hour only. We will run with same load only. Then how is it different from load test? The difference is only in terms of the data that is present in the database, the number of records that is currently present in the database. For example, let's say currently your database has some 1 lakh records. You know what is database? Like Oracle, SQL Server, which will store all the records, all the data related to the customers or whatever the application related to, right? So currently, let's say that database has 1 lakh records. Now, if the users continuously use the application for, let's say, 2 years or 3 years in production, in real time, if the users continuously use the application for 2 years or 3 years, then the records might increase. Let's say the records increase to 4 lakhs. 4 lakhs in next 2 to 3 years. In next 2 to 3 years, the number of records, okay, number of records will be increased to 4 lakhs in next 2 to 3 years. So that is the assumption. This is the assumption. That means the number of records in the database will increase, okay, to 4 lakhs in next 2 to 3 years. Currently it has only 1 lakh. So keeping this number in mind, that means keeping that there might be an increase in number of records in database in future, in near future. So what we have to do currently is now itself, okay, with the help of application team or DBA, database administrator, the person who looks after the database, we need to add or insert, okay, 3 lakhs amount of data more, 3 lakhs amount of data, okay, into the database, and then run a load test. So you generally run a load test. That's it. You don't do anything. You run a load test only. There is no difference at all. You simply run a load test. But only thing you do is you add or insert huge amount of data into the database. Why? Because you want to know when there is a huge increase in the records in database, how the application is responding. Here also we see the response times only, but specifically we concentrate on how the application is responding, how the SQL queries that run in the backend, how they are responding. Are there any long running queries? That means, is there any query that will run for long time? Do you know, you all guys know SQL query, right? Something like this. I'm just writing some small thing. Select star from employee, where employee ID is greater than something like, it's like employee ID is equal to 500 or something like that. Just giving some example. So these are some queries, right? So in the back end, application will also have some of these queries, okay, to connect to the database and to get data from the database and so on. So when you have more number of records in the database, how the application is responding, how the SQL queries are running, how the database is responding. So this volume testing is more about testing the application with huge amount of data in the database. Okay, it's a kind of backend testing also, you can say. How the database is responding, how the SQL queries, how much time the SQL queries are taking to get the response from the database. Okay, so everything is same as load test. In fact, you run a load test only. Only thing is you will insert or add huge amount of records into the database before itself. Okay, so this is about volume testing. Okay, then you ask me, sir, how can you verify whether it is taking more time or not? How can you verify whether this query is taking more time or not? How do you monitor the database queries? See, basically for those things, we do have something called APM tools in place. APM tools means monitoring, application monitoring tools like AppDynamics, Dynatrace, and so on. Okay, so we will use these tools to monitor to check the response times of these SQL queries. Okay, or anything. Are there any slow methods or any slow queries or something like that? Okay, so volume test is some similar to load test only, except that there will be huge records populated in the database. Okay, so when there is huge records in database, there is a chance that the application might respond slow. That's the reason we run this volume test. Then you also have something called failover test and those things which are which we need to discuss about something about what is a server, what is the application server, what is web server, what is database server. Okay, what is the server architecture? Okay, once you know the server architecture and all, then we will be able to discuss about the failover test. Okay, because that's a different type of test. Okay, in recent times it is more frequently being executed in all the companies. Okay, so I will tell you one or two lines about that failover test. What do you mean by that failover test is, let's say if there are 2 or 3 servers. Okay, so for those of you who know little bit about server, because we will discuss in detail tomorrow again about servers and all. So if something goes down, if something is down, so how the application is, if any of the server is down, then how the application is handling those requests, how the application is handling those requests. Okay, so for example, you are trying to try to book a train ticket or flight ticket. In the back end, some server is down. So how the application should handle then, such that the customer should not face any issue, the end user should not face any issue. So for that purpose, we will do failover test, but not frequently. Only when the only when there's a client requirement. But here, if you observe these type of tests here, load test we will do it frequently, because this is the very first test that we run. Any project, any company, anywhere in the world, the first test you do is load test only. Okay, this load test, endurance test, this scalability test, these are frequently executed tests. That means every 1 month, every 2 months, every 3 months, we run these type of tests. Then the remaining tests are rare, very rare, and depending on the client requirement only we will run. Okay, depending on the client requirement only we will run. Okay, so I will send this document to you. This will be helpful for you for sure. Okay, because it has some information, and also I have some slides, PowerPoint slides, which will explain these types of tests. So I will send you those slides also. Okay, which you can refer it, which you can keep it for reference, in for future. So any questions so far? So did you guys? So yesterday we discussed about what is performance testing. Today I just gave some information about what are the different types of tests that we do. Okay. Tomorrow we are going to discuss about very important topics like what is a server, because performance is all about servers only. So what is a server? What is application server? What is database server? What is web server? What is server architecture? Why we need to know server architecture? Okay, what is the importance of software architecture? Okay, and then if time permits, I will also tell you about failover test. Okay, we will see failover test, and then after that we will discuss about again a very important thing called workload modeling. for a couple of days. Okay, and then we will start practical sessions. Mela, yes, for time, as per the current trend, you need to know at least one of the APM tool like AppDynamics or Dynatrace. That's the reason, as part of this course, I'm explaining you about AppDynamics for 1 or 2 sessions clearly. Like on day-to-day basis, generally what a performance tester does with the AppDynamics tool. Okay, what are the different metrics they will capture from the AppDynamics tool? How the AppDynamics tool works? What is the AppDynamics architecture? Okay, so I will show you practically this AppDynamics tools. Okay, so that's okay. Yes, we need to know at least one APM tool nowadays as per the current trend. Okay, some because everything, if so, when there is some issue, when there is some performance issue, everything cannot be identified. The root cause cannot be identified, or exact issue cannot be identified. Everything cannot be identified from the analysis directly. Some important things we will be able to capture, but if you want to go drill down and get in more details or more clear root cause for the issue, then you need to use some APM tools like AppDynamics or Dynatrace. Okay, so which we will cover as part of uh, this course, one or two sessions. Ad hoc means some sudden unexpected requirement, okay, which we didn't expect, which is not there in our actual plan. So we were planning to run some sort of tests, some types of tests. Suddenly client said that, no, can you run this for me? That is something ad hoc, something come up unexpectedly, which was not there, in our plan itself, right? Sangeeta, in projects, performance testers will work on APM tool.
Hey, one thing. AppDynamics, you know that generally we'll be using all the times. So when any critical issue comes, then we'll be verifying and start doing the debugging in Dynatrace. How about the Ganglia? So which is the powerful, either Ganglia or Dynatrace?
See, it depends on project to project and the cost associated to it and all. But all these tools do the same thing. They give us some in-depth metrics using which we will be able to find the root cause easily, and it will also provide us clear information about exactly where it went wrong, who is the culprit, which method is the culprit, which query is the culprit. Okay, so it will give you the clear metrics. Okay, and it will give you dashboards where you can create your own graphs, and you can share that entire dashboard with the application team, like the developers. Okay, so that they can understand like what exactly went right and what went wrong during the test. Okay, so AppDynamics or Dynatrace or whatever may be the tool, that does the same thing. Okay, but it depends from project to project. So as part of this course, I would like to give a practical demo session on what is this AppDynamics all about, how it works. Okay, what is its architecture, what are the different metrics that we will capture on day-to-day basis. Yes, as a performance tester, we need to monitor the application through APM tool every time. It's not like only when there is issue we will go and check it. No. So why? For example, you are running a test, and then suddenly there is an increase in heap memory utilization. There is increase. How do you verify? Where you monitor that heap memory? So when let's say if you're not monitoring that, and if heap memory is reaching 100%, then what will happen? You will get out of memory exception. So in order to make sure that you are not getting those sort of issues before, okay, so you need to continuously monitor through AppDynamics. During the test also you can monitor. After the test also you can go and get the metrics. So anytime you can go and get the metrics. I personally prefer to monitor during the test itself. Okay, let me
Okay,
take
fine.
about.
But one more thing, just what I want to say, generally what I'm practicing in my current project is So as you were saying, the sequence of the type of test first will be load test, then stress test, then endurance or scalability, volume. So no, just I'm sharing experience, but initially we'll be doing the stress test to identify the breaking point, to identify the bottlenecks at a certain point of time. So if TPS is more,
No,
then
this is not the
response time.
sequence. This is
Uh,
not the sequence. The only thing is the first type of test that we do is load test. Other than that, everything is not sequence. It depends on project requirements. The first type of test is only the load test, just to see, okay, how the application is responding with the expected load. Of course, client has given some number, how it is responding. So when this is not working, how can you run a stress test beyond the load? How
so
can you
that's what
go
in
to an
this
extent
case
where it
we'll
breaks?
be giving the general. So in that case, generally we'll be giving the certain number of users. We'll be scheduling the test for half an hour or 1 hour. Then we'll be seeing the whether seeing the graphs in the performance center, like whether test is
Yeah.
running fine or not, and find any breaking point. At certain
Yes.
time stage, if we see any bottlenecks or any breaking point, then we'll call it breaking point, and we can take that number of users at where exactly at a certain point of time. Then we'll be reducing 10-20% from the stress test of users. Then we'll be running the load test accordingly. Suppose let's take the 500 users we applied. At
Mhm.
point of 400 users, we identify the breaking point. So from that
Okay.
400 users breaking point, and we'll be reducing the, you will not be giving 100% users of 400 users. Then we'll be calculating and reducing the 10-20% of users. Then
See,
we'll be giving
basically,
accordingly 8 users.
yeah. So basically, if the client is not, if the client is not in a position to tell the exact metrics, then we actually run until the breaking point. So we will see where exactly is breaking. Okay, we keep on adding the users, and we'll see where exactly it's breaking, and we can provide our observations to client. You see, the even though the approach is different, the end of the day, what we are trying to achieve is same. So even though if you run a stress test and from that you derive the load test, that is also fine. But end of the day, what you are trying to do, you are trying to analyze how the application is responding in the during the expected volumes, and how the application is responding beyond the load, and how the application is responding when you are continuously applying the stress, and so on. So end of the day, the approach might be different, but end of the day, the metrics dot what you are going to verify and what you are going to test will be same.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree your point, but in my case, so we'll be working for some ex client, so there will not be providing any users. So they are
Yeah,
giving the
yeah, that's the
initial
reason.
requirement. Then we'll be deriving the stress. Then we'll be going the endurance or regression test. Then we'll be giving the necessary approvals for the performance sign for the further proceeding release loads.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So Prasanna, yes, actually, they are not called as types of testing. Those are actually baseline and benchmark test. There is a separate concept which we will discuss in our upcoming session. So I'll tell you what is a baseline test, what is a benchmark test, and all. We will discuss that, sure, for sure. It's part of the course. uh, Kavyasri, if the Kavyasri is asking if the application is working fine with load test, why it will fail in endurance test? For that, I know I request you to wait for one or a few more sessions. So I'll tell you why it will break in endurance test. For what reason it will break in the endurance test? Okay. So once we master some of the important concepts of performance testing, okay. Once you discuss some of the advanced concepts also, then you will get an idea like why it can break in endurance testing. Okay, if I tell you now, probably you may or may not understand. So it's all about how the memory consumption, or how the memory utilization is happening in the backend. So if something is going beyond the threshold limit and exceeding and reaching 100%, then it can fail. The chances of failing in endurance test is more because we are running it for longer duration. We are running it for longer duration. Okay, like 5 hours, 8 hours, 1 day, and so on. But but load test we are running only for 1 hour, right? So that's the reason you might not see that memory leaks or memory issues in load test most of the times. Most of the times the memory leak or memory exceptions will come in the endurance test only because we are running for longer duration. So why it will come in the endurance test? how the memory will be allocated. Okay, then we need to understand some concepts called garbage collection, and how the memory will be allocated. Okay, how the objects are created by developers and all. Some concepts are there related to. If you want to understand it clearly, I request to wait for a few more days. I will definitely explain you in detail about why it can fail, where it can fail exactly, and so on. Sangeeta, the difference between performance tester and performance engineer is performance tester will identify the issues. Okay, for example, performance tester will identify the performance issues. For example, the high response times and so on. And so, so performance engineer will go one step more and not only identify the performance issues, will also try to provide some solutions to the identified issues. So performance engineer will have a good amount of knowledge on all the architectures, little bit of programming also, and some good amount of database experience like queries and all those things. So performance engineer should be in a position to know exactly what's going wrong and what can be done better. So till that level, the performance engineer can support. But performance tester can only tell what is the issue, what could be the reason by looking at the AppDynamics. They can tell like what is the reason for the high response time and so on. So till there, performance tester can go. Performance engineer will go one step ahead and say, okay, this can be the good solution for this. Okay, they can provide some solutions also to the identified issues. So initially, every person will begin their career as a performance tester. Slowly, they will evolve and they will master the tools and the technologies. They will understand different types of projects, different architectures. Okay, and then slowly they will become a performance engineer going forward. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? So tomorrow we are going to discuss about what is a server, what is software architecture, why it is important. Okay, and then what is web server, database server, and all those things. Any other questions for today? Yes, Prasanna. Baseline benchmark we will cover for sure. It's a we have some session for that. Okay, so whatever the slides we have, I have slides for everything for the initial 5 or 6 theoretical sessions, 4 or 5 theoretical sessions. We have complete slides. So I will share all those slides with you soon. Okay, it will definitely help you to for reference purpose. Thank you once again, everyone. I hope to see all of you in the upcoming sessions as well. Okay, thank you. Have a great rest of the day.